What's your creepiest glitch in the Matrix or unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? Several years ago, I went home, turned on my PC, browsed the web for a bit, literally watched a video about the Matrix, then looked out of my window. Then I suddenly snapped awake sitting in my chair. I looked at my monitor to see that it had turned off. I thought strange. I must have fallen asleep and proceeded to move the mouse to wake my PC from sleep mode. It did not wake up. I was confused until I noticed that the power strip was not even plugged in. It had never been turned on in the first place. That one weirded me out for quite a while. I must have gone home, fell asleep and dreamt the whole thing. At least I hope so. I had never been turned on in the first place. You're an android. You were on low battery mode. My wife and I were at the local mall shopping. We were walking around in Spencer's and there was a display with a bunch of steamy boxed outfits. Once we saw them, we both blurted out, "This looks like something Samantha, an acquaintance we both knew from mutual friends, would wear." At the exact same time, we started laughing about it, and as we walked around the corner, the Samantha we were talking about was looking at the exact same rack but from the other side. We were both like, what in the frick? We hadn't seen her in probably a year or so before then. That left everyone scratching their heads for a bit. I shared this a few years ago when this question was asked last time, and didn't really realize how glitchy in the Matrix it was until people started commenting, haha. In college, I took a hard news soft news journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it on a deceased grandparent, but if all of your grandparents were still alive we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated actually doing the assignment until the night before it was due because it seemed like a morbid assignment, especially once all of my grandparents were still alive. Scramming for an easy grandparent to write about, I gave my mom a call and asked her for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking about my grandpa's career, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked at. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute to write the assignment because it was late, 10:30 p.m. my grandpa's time. However, she said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake and be able to answer that question once my assignment was due the following morning. When my mom called my grandpa, my grandma answered the phone in a panic. My grandma frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom was able to stay on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital, where he was declared dead. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was dying. His death was entirely unexpected at that. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that writing assignment as his actual obituary. Still freaks me out when I think about the timing. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden it was like someone pressed play and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out. Sounds like what Improv Everywhere does. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a street light, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked what's wrong. She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Sorry that your dog was haunted. I have a jade Buddhist necklace I bought in China about 10 years ago. It disappears for months at a time only to reappear somewhere obvious like my desk, my dresser, in a drawer I use every day. I just say it goes on a trip and will come back eventually. A friend and I went to a buddy's house for a day party. Stayed up playing Halo 2 and hanging out. We all crash in the basement. Friend who came with me and I got up at the same time. Not like one after each other, we both got up at the same time after being asleep for a few hours and rushed to the bathroom. R was more athletic than me, probably still is, and beat me there. I ran upstairs, barely getting my head over the toilet before puking my guts out. R was doing the same thing in the basement. I was wearing a wooden cross my grandmother mailed me from Romania. I'm not religious but I appreciated the gift as I had never met her at that point. Cross somehow became detached from the cord, fell on the tile and broke into 2 pieces. So we both call our respective mothers and get picked up. By now it's like 3-4 am. Felt sick up until we left the house. Once I was in the car and a few blocks away, felt perfectly fine. I reported the same thing to me that day over MSN Messenger. Felt perfectly fine after a few blocks. Got the pictures developed a few weeks later. There's a picture of us on the couch rocking some Halo and the whole room looks like it's filled with mist. Super spooky. I've been looking for the pic for a long time and I can't seem to find it anymore. But every few years my sister and I search my mom's photo albums for it. Sounds like there was maybe a gas in this basement that made you sick. 2 things. Each was witnessed by at least one other person and both were while driving. One's at a stop sign in a neighborhood. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3-4 featuring off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 featuring wide by 3-4 featuring tall. It lasted 3-5 seconds and then they were gone. No one was around and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too he breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. We spoke about it a little more but there is no reasonable explanation. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road. Very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him, so not to hit him and then he disappeared. Our minds were blown to say the least. Just poof and he's gone. All of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair roughly 3-4 featuring off the ground out of nowhere. The group of them were roughly 2 featuring wide by 3-4 featuring tall. It lasted 3-5 seconds and they were gone. Someone in your party leveled up. I've got several kids and night terrors are always a bit freaky, but once you know it's normal and what it's like, you kind of get used to it. But my middle child had something happen a couple years ago that didn't seem like it could be a night terror. He's almost 5 now and has been pretty advanced in academics for a while. Somehow learned how to read the names of numbers and colors and such and I accidentally found out one day when I caught him reading what I had written. He came into my room very upset one night. Night terror. Except he was fully awake. I know they can seem like they're awake but they're not. But I had him doing math. 3 + 2 is 5. Asking very high level questions about things. He seemed fully alert and aware. But he was seeing something my wife and I could not see. Something threatening and scary. The fly was going to get him. He shrieked ear-piercing screeches, consistently turning away and back to the doorway into my master bath where he saw this thing that was invisible to me. This happened for a few nights, too. I could only reassure him that he was okay and nothing was there and we would protect him. You're okay. You're okay, I'd tell him. He always darted down the hallway between his room and mine for a few days after this, reassuring himself by saying I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay as he ran. Poor thing. Freaked my wife and me out completely. There is a sleep condition where you wake up, feel fully cognitive, but are still semi-immersed in a dream that leads to visual and audible hallucinations. I once clocked out of work at 6 PM, like I always did at the time, and began my hour-long train ride home. After I had found a seat, I went to sleep and woke up just before my station. From the station, it is a short bus journey, 10-15 minutes, to reach home. During the entire journey, I didn't use my phone and I don't wear a watch so I didn't really notice the time anywhere. When I reached home, my family surprised me with "You're home early. Everything alright?" I look at the wall clock and it is about to be 6 PM. I was too shocked to understand what happened. checked other watches, cell phones etc, and the time is absolutely right. A few days later, the admin emailed us the timesheets for the month. Times clocking in and out, and every single days for me was around the same 6 PM. So it certainly wasn't me having left work earlier. To this date, I haven't figured out how I gained between 60-90 minutes that day. The most common theory in comments seems to be the DST, and I have considered it before. The problem is that it should work for both time in and time out, and if I remember the time in was the same as always and I didn't leave my home early for work. If I remember right, it also wasn't a Monday, which is when the clock reset effects come through at work despite the changes going in on Sunday. Someone else is trying to figure out how they lost 60-90 minutes. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, and a car ran a stop sign on an on-ramp and pulled out right in front of me. I remember bracing for impact, and then I was about 300 yards down the highway and I saw the car at the ramp in my rear view, just about to pull out. You died on the spot and your mind is living an alternate timeline. Once when we were kids, I had some friends with an Ouija board at the basement of the building where I lived. Through the stairs there was an elevator shaft that had these wide bars where you could stick your arm in them. Typical old elevator design. So one night, they decided to go to the basement to do another Ouija session, and I decided to drop a cup of glass through the shaft, just to scare them off. I let go of the cup, saw it vanish into the darkness, and I never heard the cup hit the ground. I stood there, confused. Next day, I went downstairs at the basement with one of my friends, and the cup was there, placed in the middle of the elevator shaft floor. The cup was upright and intact. I was seriously freaked out by that, because it would be impossible to someone enter the elevator shaft and place the cup there like that. The cup should have broken into pieces since I threw it from the 10th floor against a cement floor. The entire world have slowed down for me a couple of times in my life. My best guess is some kind of adrenaline spike causing my brain to go into overdrive. After my little brother was murdered the next morning, I was talking with a friend and he mentioned this other dude I went to high school with younger brother had died in a car accident a couple weeks before. Later that day I pull out a slip of paper with this other dude's number and name on it from my pants. I vaguely remember running into him a year or so before this at a club where he gave me his number. I swear I had worn and washed these jeans at least a dozen times since I had run into this dude. I still makes no sense how that paper was there and I only found it then. I called the dude and we talked a bunch. It really helped me deal with the situation. I was walking my dog and I was almost to the driveway when I looked down for some reason and I looked back up and I ended up being back at the road about 6 blocks away from where I thought I was. I was so confused, but my dog looked completely fine. For your information, I don't drink or do drugs. I'm still pretty young. 6 blocks, that's freaky. If it was just a few meters I probably would chop it up to not paying attention or something, but that's intense. Should say chalk it up, but the replies have been so funny about it, I'm going to leave it. My sister pretended to feed my bear when we were kids. I saw the beans on the spoon. She put it to his mouth and scooped. Showed me the spoon and the beans were gone. No beans on his lip. Nothing. Like he actually ate it. She never told me how she did it and she doesn't remember doing it now. I assume you're talking about a teddy bear, but I kind of hope you're not. I had just pulled into the parking lot of where I worked and was walking towards the building. It was like 3 in the afternoon. Broad daylight. All of a sudden, I heard an ambulance's siren start sounding. Naturally, I looked down the road to try and see the ambulance. I see it approaching and decided to watch it for a bit. It was quickly getting closer, and it was about to pass right by me. However, there was a large SUV waiting to turn out of the parking lot and onto the road, blocking a few meters of the road from my view. The ambulance passed behind the SUV, probably about 50 feet away from me at most, and I vividly remember the siren becoming completely silent in that instant. The ambulance had vanished entirely as it passed behind that SUV. I was so confused. The road did not have many cars on it at the time, and it was broad daylight. I did a triple take and made sure that I didn't just miss it. I had a clear view of the road going both directions, and there was no more ambulance to be seen. No more siren either. I walked up and down the road, trying to find it for a solid minute, but nope, it was gone. I was well rested, not on drugs, and I didn't have a history of hallucinations. It seems dismissible, but I was completely aware of what happened, and I can't explain it to this day. As someone who used to have such hallucinations, security footage helps a great deal. Also, a pet is really useful. If they aren't responding, I could relax. My wife passed away a year ago today. Had some odd things happen, like a couple of old meaningful pictures show up that I swore were in storage. The strangest one was I vacuumed the carpet, and as soon as I was done, a diamond ring was on the ground right where I had just cleaned. It was like she was saying, hey, this one is real, don't lose it. This one is really lovely. I'm sorry for your loss. I hope finding these things brought back some wonderful memories. When I was living with my parents, my dad was cleaning out one of his drawers and found a piece of paper with a postcode for a nearby city on. When he showed me, I immediately recognized it as my own handwriting, except I have no memory of ever writing out this postcode. So I punched the postcode into maps to find it is a random street I have never visited before, and I have no reason to visit it. I wish I had have gone. Maybe the universe was trying to show me something. It was you from the future trying to send your past self a message. Quick, it's not too late. Around 12 years old, I was watching Megas XLR, or something that was on at the time. Sitting there, I noticed that the sun just turned off, like completely. I was real confused, opened the blinds and it was dark. Show was still at the same spot, but the clock on the cable box said it was 5 hours later. My best guess for what happened was that I passed out without realizing it, like those nights where you lay in bed and blink and suddenly it's morning. So I'm guessing I fell asleep sitting up for exactly enough time to have Cartoon Network play a rerun of the show get to the exact spot I fell asleep at. Was surreal though. I think you just fell into a light sleep. Sometimes when I'm in the passenger seat of a car on a long drive, I'll fall asleep listening to the radio. When I wake up, it feels like I didn't even sleep, and I can remember everything that was on the radio, but the other person in the car is certain I sleep. I snore. I should have fallen into the River Thames once. Me and some friends from uni were exploring London and taking pictures beside the Thames when I decide posing next to the wall is a weak photo, so decide to climb up for better photo opportunities. As I hoisted myself up, I must have used far too much power and knew fully I was about to go straight over and into the river, which was like a 20-foot drop. I managed to get 1 foot onto the wall and felt something completely stop my momentum. Almost felt like divine intervention in a way. I stood up straight, alive and still on dry land, as I turned to express how close I was to dying there, and then someone took a photo of me, which is still one of the best photos I've had taken of me to date. If someone took a photo of me after a near-death experience like that, the only notable feature of it would be a growing wet spot on my pants. I am 100% sure I vividly remember a dog that apparently doesn't exist. When I was 16, we lived on the other side of the province and my uncle had this little Jack Russell named Crew. Crew went missing for several months and then turned up at a humane society over an hour away, and we were all shocked this little dog has made it so far. Anyway, that was almost 20 years ago, and the other day I was talking to my parents and was like, whenever I hear about Jack Russells I think about Crew and that stunt he pulled, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Insisted my uncle had never had such a dog. I must have dreamed it, etc. Honestly, anyone else who would have remembered this dog has been dead for a long time, and I don't even have any pictures of my uncle. I have absolutely no way to prove this dog existed, but I'm sure that he did. They may have just forgotten. My parents are like this as well. Not that long ago I was telling them about a letter I had written to my dad while he was away a few years ago. They both insisted I must have dreamt it, but I found it not long after. Sometimes people can be forgetful. It doesn't necessarily mean Crew didn't exist. When I was a kid, I had a dream. A bunch of us kids were playing hide and seek near my house out in the snow. I started digging into the snow to hide and came across a dead girl. The very next day, I was walking home from school and pretty much in the exact same area I dug in my dream. I saw the girl. Same hair, same face, same jacket. I was across the street, but I kept staring at her while walking. She eventually noticed and I ran off. Never saw her again. Was the weirdest thing ever. A total of 3 times in my life I have had memories of seeing movie trailers that hadn't been made yet. It's not even a feeling of deja vu, it's a clear vivid memory of seeing the movie before. The movies were The Blind Side, Devil and Prometheus. I've never spoken to someone who has also had this with movies. It's so weird feeling like I've seen movies before they come out. Happens to me most often with movie trailers. And I'm talking years difference in time between them being made and when I saw them earlier. Very odd. I was working on my motorcycle in a dirt lot where I had crashed it trying to do a sick drift, breaking off the clutch lever and the gear shifter. I had brought a wrench set with me and I was using one of them to take off a bolt when I put it down on the ground to finish unscrewing the bolt with my hand. 2 minutes later I went to pick it back up and it was gone. I ran all around this dirt lot looking for it to no avail. Luckily I had a spare in the car. Fixed the bike and drove back to my apartment to shower as I was filthy. I walked in my room and sitting on my desk was the wrench. I was dumbfounded. I remember driving my car to this intersection in this rural area and I'm checking both sides because of terrible blind spots. In the corner of my eye my mother is sitting there and says something like it's all clear my way. I look back and she isn't there. My mother had been dead for a few years at this point. This was also in the middle of the day and I've never had it happen since. I actually think that is lovely. I hope you found this heartwarming rather than scary. Sorry for your loss. I was reading Kurt Vonnegut's last book, Timequake, and had put it in my backpack to read while on the bus. I left the house and for some reason about a block later I thought to myself, did I put the book in my bag? I looked and it wasn't there. Went back to the house and couldn't find it. Retraced my steps to where I turned around and it was nowhere to be found. I never found the book again and gave up on trying to get another copy. I think it was Vonnegut's way of telling me it wasn't worth the read. More likely Vonnegut's way of getting you to buy another copy. Well, my story is a bit creepy cause I lost myself. This was like 7 years ago when I was still in high school. It was a normal day, all classes went well till the math class began. The teacher was explaining the lesson and how it was related to the previous lesson we had the previous day. Everything the teacher was explaining was new to me and never heard before, so I was like, yeah sure. I wasn't paying attention again during that class. So I opened my notebook to check what I wrote about that class. I always write everything discussed during math class cause I sucked at math and my dad was strict about it, which got my teacher to be strict also with me, and found nothing about the previous class. I asked my friend sitting next to me to give me his notebook to make sure and I found like a whole new material from the last class that I've never seen before. So I started investigating after the class, going around asking my classmates this crazy question: was I here yesterday during the math class? And they were like, what? And I explained the whole thing to them and apparently I was not there. I attended both classes before and after the math class and wrote everything of both classes in my notebook, but I have no memory where I was during the math class. And the schools where I live have a one-class system where students stay in their class and teachers come to them for the lecture, then leave and the next subject's teacher comes and so on. So we know each other well and everybody I asked said that I wasn't there during the math class. So yeah, I lost myself for approximately an hour. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.